Hi, my name is Alex, and this is a presentation about playing with books. Shared reading for early emergent literacy learners with complex communication needs. This presentation is intended for pre-service educational assistance. Each time we sit down to look at a book together, we are faced with a choice. It's a bit of a Matrix moment. In the Matrix, Morpheus asks, "Do you want to take the red pill or the blue pill?" In shared reading, I ask, "Do you want to take the chocolate pudding or the spinach?" Every time we read a book with our student, we have an opportunity to make it fun or unpleasant. If you take the chocolate pudding, you make shared reading a fun experience. If you choose the plate of boiled spinach, you make shared reading an awful experience that your student will resist and want to avoid. So when you sit down to read, you are not just reading the book front to back. There's a bit more to think about. And the choice is yours. Which one are you going to choose? For learners who are emerging in their communication and literacy skills, they might not yet know what books have to offer. They might not be interested in books at all. Sometimes people tell me, "We don't look at books. They don't like books. He closes his eyes, he runs away, he screams, yada yada." If that's the case, we know what pill that adult was choosing. Often students resist shared reading because they had coercive and unfun past experiences with it. Maybe they were forced to sit. Maybe it was boring. Maybe they weren't interested. I would avoid that too. It should be about the interaction between the two of you. We are showing them why books are awesome. They are funny and silly. They have pictures to look at. They tell a story. We learn things. We make meaning and connection with our own life and experiences. And they broaden our knowledge of the world and spark our imaginations. When we are teaching learners what books have to offer, we have to be fun and animated. We have to find a way to hook them into liking books and to being interested in them. If students don't like them, it's probably because they've always been a spinach experience. We have to invest in getting them to like books. And I really mean invest. We should have at least 3 shared reading opportunities a day. So always carry some books with you, and when you're waiting or you have some downtime, that's the perfect opportunity to squeeze in a little shared reading. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be referring to an observational tool called the Bridge. It's an 8-point rating scale that we use to measure early literacy skills. So this section of the Bridge is looking at how a learner engages in reading. And indirectly, it's telling us how we are doing in helping to nurture a love of books in them. So for a student who might not be interested in books, they might not pay attention to us when we're trying to read to them, or they're not listening and playing with something else, that would be considered a 1. A 2 is engaging with the book and with us. A 3 is pointing to items in the pictures, and so on, all the way to 8, which is pretending to read. This is a fabulous tool because it gives us an idea where our student is at and what might come next. This rating scale isn't necessarily linear, and students don't have to hit each mark on the scale as they progress. We can see how skills become more sophisticated over time with experience and opportunity. Another reason why shared reading with emergent learners is so important is because it teaches them how books work. Observing how learners interact with books on their own gives us a lot of information about what they know about books. Do they know how to hold the book right side up? Do they know that we turn the pages from front to back, that we read left to right, or even just knowing that text is there, knowing that we get information from pictures and from text? We can rate their understanding of how books work with the Bridge as well. So how do they physically handle and interact with books? Do they rip or mouth books? Do they hold books appropriately, unprompted, when they just sit down and grab a book themselves? Do they hold it the right way? The bridge really gives us a window into what stage in their journey they're on in understanding how books work and how to interact with books. This might seem like such a small thing, but we want them to know that reading is a partnership and that it's not something that's happening to them, but happening with them. So we want to have them be a part of it from the start by giving them choices about what to read. And it's so important, we want to always offer the choice of something different as like a third, fourth, or fifth choice. So if I'm offering these two choices, everyone poops or don't let the pigeon drive the bus, I'm also going to say, or something different, so that they can indicate if they want something other than the one I've presented to them. Giving them choice from the beginning is a way to help them start to take some ownership of the shared reading experience. A stage 1 on the bridge would be choosing books from a selection, or a 3 would be initiating shared reading on their own and bringing a book to you to say, let's read. So it might seem really small in the beginning to be offering choices, but we're just trying to set them on a path to understanding that they're a part of it and that they have a voice in this exchange. So I hope so far it's pretty obvious that shared reading is about a two-way interaction. I want to think about now, like, how do we pull them into that interaction? Because it's not always so easy. We have to be fun and flexible. And we have to be aware of their engagement while we're reading. We're going to be looking, are they engaged or are they trying to run away? And we're going to change our behavior based on their level of participation. So we can pull them in more by being animated and using attention getters like gasping or pointing or saying, oh, wow, or kind of having these big reactions. When we're monitoring their engagement, we get to make the call about reading the whole page or just, skipping parts of the text or skipping parts of the book. If we are losing them, don't read so much. So just think about their engagement. Think about, how can I keep this like a positive experience, a chocolate pudding experience for them? And for those learners who are like really tricky to engage, we can think about engaging them with multi-sensory tools. So can you, use a puppet or a prop? How can you get them participating? Like, what else can you bring to get them engaged in being a part of looking at this book together? So let's take a bit of a closer look at some of the strategies that we can use to help pull our students in and make them interested in reading with us. Jane Farrell has a fantastic strategy for engaging emergent learners. It's called Share the Air. It involves you, the learner, a book, and their communication system. So we can't forget about their AAC system when we're sitting down to read. We want to make sure we have that as well. So with this Share the Air strategy, there's 3 parts to it. The A is the attention getter. So this is drawing their attention to the book with like a gasp, or wow, or, pointing and saying, oh, look, or just being really animated to draw them in. The second piece is inviting participation. So we do this by making comments. It can be really enticing when you're shared reading to ask questions, but I just want you to think about making comments and doing a lot of waiting and just giving them time and the space to come up with their own response or add their own thing. And so that's the share part of this. We're sharing the air. It's not just us talking at them. We're making some comments and we're waiting. And then the last piece, the R, is responding. And with our early communicators, we're going to attribute meaning to their body and their language and their face and their vocalizations, and we're going to make our best guess about what their contribution means. So if they're laughing, we can make a comment about what we see and say, oh, you're smiling, you're laughing. And then we can put core vocabulary to it and use their AAC system to say, oh, I think you like this. You're telling me you like this, or that's funny. And model that on their system. So let's take a look at Share the Air in action. If we are reading the book No David, David's always up to no good in this book. He's reaching for the cookie jar on the top shelf, almost falling off. Our attention getter to draw them into the page could be like, oh, wow, and modeling wow on their AAC system. And then we're going to do the I. We're going to invite participation and wait. So I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to say, uh-oh, be careful, David, and wait. And that might mean like counting to 10 in my head. And don't forget that waiting is so critical. It's where the share and the share the air comes into play. We have to give them space to make their own comment and participate. And we're going to watch them. Sometimes the response isn't on AAC, or it's a facial expression or a body movement. So if you see them like making a big face, just name what you see and then label that with AAC. So if this was our student, we could say, oh, I see your face. Oh, I think you're saying stop. And model stop with AAC. So it's pretty simple. Let's look at one more example. Our attention getter on this page, come back here, David, might be, uh-oh. We will invite participation by making a comment. Look at his bum, look, and modeling that on their AAC system. And then we're going to wait. Remember, count to 10 in your head. We are sharing the air, we're waiting, giving them space and time to look and think and respond. And maybe they respond with laughter. And we can say, you're smiling. You're laughing. Oh, it's so funny. And then model on their AAC system, I like it too. It's so funny. Sometimes their response might be off topic, or you don't really know what they mean by that response. Like they might reach for their AAC system and pick a symbol that seems kind of random to you. And what I want you to do is just try to attribute meaning to it as best you can. So if you're looking at this page and they press the symbol up, then just try to make your best guess about what they mean and say, yeah, he's running up the street. Just make your best guess. We just want to let them know that we hear them, we acknowledge their turn, and we make our best guess about it. We can also use the adaptive bridge to monitor how they're interacting with AAC during shared reading. So you'll see that the idea is that we wanted them to be using it more and more, and it's starting off as like just watching their partner model to eventually using it to comment and communicate about the book. It goes without saying, when we're reading, we have to be providing aided language input. And to be able to provide aided language input, the system's got to be there. We have to have it with us. We're missing out on a language learning opportunity if we don't have that there and we're not modeling for them. So at the very least, we want to be giving them an opportunity to observe the partner model on their system. It's so important that we do this and we pull this in, because we're teaching them an aided language and they need to have that exposure to us using it while we're reading. So far, we've talked a little bit about why shared reading is so important and the share the air strategy. I want to just take this time now to talk a little bit about things that we want to avoid. It's so tempting to open up a book and just ask a bunch of questions. Where's the bunny? Who's that? What's that? We want to avoid making it into a quiz. It's not about correctness and it's not about comprehension. At this stage, we are in emergent instruction. They are not conventional yet. The goal is just for them to be discovering text and engaging with you. It's not about answering questions correctly. It's also not about sitting and watching quietly for the entire duration of the book while you read every word on every page. We don't want to be making this experience too long for them, longer than they can participate for. We will build their tolerance for shared reading over time. As they have experiences that are fun, they'll be more motivated to do it and more motivated to engage. And slowly over time, we'll build their interest and be able to read for longer. So we really need to be monitoring them and making decisions in the moment, like, should I skip this part? Or let me paraphrase that, like, we don't have to read every single piece. We've already talked about being very conscious of the number of questions you're asking. I think that this is a nice way to think about it when you're reading. You want to be using play talk and not business talk. So play talk is really child-led. You're following their lead. You might be describing objects and events. as opposed to just asking them questions. Our next strategy is print referencing. Jane Farrell has this awesome handout with some print referencing ideas. Our learners are really emergent ones. We can sprinkle in print referencing, but we have to remember this needs to be a chocolate pudding experience. We have to gauge the learner's level of engagement. When we're just trying to convince them that books are fun, we don't want to lay on the print referencing really heavy. We can ease into doing this more and more as their interest in books blossoms. If we focus too much on print referencing too soon, it's going to become more of a spinach experience. The bridge helps us figure out where our learner is at in terms of their understanding of print. So our really early emerging students have no idea print exists. They don't even know that it's a thing. So we're taking them from this place where pictures and words on the page all look kind of the same to eventually having them beginning to recognize print on the page and making a print-to-speech connection. The ultimate goal is to get them to understand the concept of a word. They might all of a sudden realize there's a string of this text and they know that text is different than pictures, but we eventually want them to get to know that a word that we say matches a word on a page. They don't have to be able to read it, just having that connection that what we say is also in writing. So let's look at a couple really easy print referencing examples. One that we can always do when we are about to read a book is to point out the title. We can read the title to them and say, "Oh, Zoom, this is the title of the book. It tells us what the book is about." Just something really simple. We can also point out specific letters. I always call the special letter the first letter of that student's name. So if you're reading and you're noticing their special letter, you can point that out and say, "Oh, I see your special letter, S for Scout." Doesn't have to be a big thing, just pointing it out while you're reading. Don't underestimate the power of reading a familiar book. Reading a book over and over and over again is a great way to really get into shared reading. If you find one that they like, put that on repeat and read it every day. Maybe you don't really know what they like yet. How do we choose books to make familiar? Books that are memorable but not necessarily memorizable. Those books that have repeated lines or dialogue are great choices. Obviously ones with really nice pictures, high picture support, and it's going to be different depending on the learner what they like, but try to tap into their special interests. Erin Sheldon talks about repeated readings being another solution to help with reluctant readers. This is a quote from her. She says, "Typically, developing toddlers demand that their caregivers read beloved books hundreds of times. Some of our students need this level of exposure to a text so that the story becomes so predictable they can concentrate instead on the interaction." Repeated reading is also uniquely important for students who are non-speaking because it gives us a chance to cue them to learn to use their inner voice. So even though they don't speak with their mouth, they do have a voice inside their head. So when typically developing mouth-talking kids are engaging in shared reading and it's books that they really like and there's those repeated lines that come up, they tend to say them with you. So we can do the same for our non-speaking kids and tell them when that line comes up, we can tell them use the voice in your head when you reread that part of the book. So we can be encouraging them to developing that internal voice. So how else can we hook in resistant readers? I've never actually met a learner who didn't like books. If they didn't like conventional books, they certainly liked books about themselves or books that we wrote together. So personalized books can be a great way into the broader world of storybooks. Many kids love looking at themselves and seeing themselves in books. We have to start somewhere, start taking pictures of them doing things, throughout the day, just snap photos of them. And then we can use those to make them into books. And they can also be a part of writing that book too. Keep the book short, 5 to 10 pages. They can be on apps like Pictello or on PowerPoint or Tar Heel Reader. And you can also print them out too to have hard copies of them. They don't have to be fancy, like just keep the language simple. And over time, we can just start to develop a personal library of books that they can reread over and over and over again. Here's an example from Tar Heel Reader. I don't know who this student is. I just pulled up a book with a student example. If you are taking photos of students and peers, I would recommend doing it on Pictello or PowerPoint, just so that it's not public on the internet. But this is just an example that someone was very generous to share online, and it's Lewis's day at Sunnyview. So I'm not going to show the whole book, but it just shows some examples about, what you can include in a book about Lewis's real life. This is where I put my lunch bag, and it's a picture of the lunch bin. This is my walker. I use this every day, and so on and so on. They have a bunch of different pictures about different things he does at school. So we can really easily make books about our students. Just start taking pictures of them doing stuff. When the class goes on a walk or you're, doing an activity, take pictures of that. You can make alphabet books. You can make like my B book and then go around and take pictures of things that start with B, like including people and objects and toys. It's kind of, the options are endless. And this can be such a great way to pull in those kids that are a bit reluctant. Okay, so that's kind of the main strategies to get started, the main things to think about when you're working with really emergent communicators and literacy learners. Just keep in mind, Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver say 3 times a day minimum. We want to be sharing in a book 3 times a day minimum. And remember, we want it to be a chocolate pudding experience. So keep it fun. Give them time to communicate. Give them space. It's about the interaction. It's not about reading a book start to finish.